March 14, 2012. Ross Ice Shelf, Antarctica. It's cold, bone cold. The kind of cold that burns your lungs with each breath. The ice stretches in every direction, a stark white desert, under a sky so blue it seems artificial. Wind scours the surface, sending plumes of crystalline powder dancing across an endless plain. Somewhere in the distance, the ice shelf groans as ancient pressures shift beneath the surface. Inside a modified M113 tracked vehicle parked beside a massive ice cliff, a young sonar technician named Sarah Reeves leans into the screen of her ground-penetrating radar system. The vehicle's heaters struggle against the sub-zero temperatures outside. Her monitor displays not the surface ahead, but what lies beneath. The reading is impossible. It shows movement 200 feet below the ice. Rhythmic, deliberate. Her team leader looks at her sideways and mutters, "You're really convinced something's moving down there, aren't you?" Sarah doesn't answer. Her breath fogs the screen. Her fingers tighten around the system controls. She's quiet, still analyzing. Then through the static, a pattern emerges. It's a signature unlike anything in their database. Large, cohesive, mobile. It's pulsing with a regularity that defies natural explanation, moving slowly along the base of the ice shelf where nothing should be moving at all. Sarah exhales, adjusts a setting. The signal sharpens, undeniable now. Inside the vehicle, the glaciologist gasps. The commander says, "Christ almighty, Reeves, that can't be right." But Sarah Reeves doesn't react. She's already adjusting the sensors, tracking the anomaly. Because this isn't just equipment error, this is discovery. This is what happens when a Navy sonar specialist from Minnesota redefines our understanding of what lies beneath Antarctica's ice by detecting something that shouldn't exist. They questioned her. They said it was impossible, until it wasn't. And when the evidence finally mounted, the scientific community wasn't the only one shocked. The technician no one expected. Before she became the woman who discovered the greatest scientific anomaly beneath the Antarctic ice, Sarah Reeves was just another quiet specialist from Rochester, Minnesota. She wasn't tall, she wasn't outspoken. She didn't grow up around ice or even mountains. She grew up listening to things others couldn't hear. Her father was an audio engineer. Her mother taught physics at a community college, and like so many technically minded young people after 9/11, Sarah enlisted in the United States Navy because she wanted structure and purpose. She never imagined she would end up at the bottom of the world, let alone discovering something that would challenge fundamental assumptions about what lies beneath Earth's most mysterious continent. Sarah trained at the Naval Submarine School in Groton, Connecticut, where she was assigned to advance sonar systems. Her instructors noted she had exceptional hearing, remarkable pattern recognition skills, and an intuitive understanding of acoustic propagation that most trainees needed years to develop. While others relied on computer interpretations, Sarah listened beyond the algorithms. She detected nuances. She identified anomalies. She questioned. Still, no one particularly noticed her. She wasn't the fastest. She wasn't the most vocal. And in a military where assertiveness often determined advancement, Sarah stayed in the background until she got to Antarctica. By the time her specialized skills led to her assignment at Operation Deep Freeze in January 2012, the scientific mission had shifted. Climate change had accelerated ice shelf breakup across the continent. The Pentagon had grown increasingly concerned about geopolitical implications. Multiple nations were establishing research outposts that looked suspiciously like military installations. But now came the complicated part. Monitoring activity beneath the ice, in the hidden realm where conventional surveillance failed, that's where the modified ground-penetrating radar systems came in. The technology had evolved from simple ice depth measurements to sophisticated arrays that could map subglacial lakes, identify geological formations, and potentially track submarine activity near the continental shelf. But the equipment had limitations, serious ones. Standard GPR struggled with signal attenuation at extreme depths. Ice composition variations created false readings. Power requirements in the harsh Antarctic environment restricted operational capabilities. Scientists joked that Antarctic research was like using stone tools to perform brain surgery through a blindfold. Still, the technology had advantages. When calibrated correctly and interpreted skillfully, it could reveal secrets beneath thousands of feet of ice. But it required expertise, and it required specialists willing to distinguish between signal and noise. That's where Sarah came in. After 2 months of routine surveys and calibration work, her team had developed a rhythm. Her commander was Lieutenant Colonel James Harrington, a career military scientist with the U.S. Antarctic program, who balanced research with strategic objectives. Keep it simple, Harrington liked to say. Collect, analyze, report. But Sarah was starting to think important discoveries weren't going to come from collecting and reporting. They would come from questioning, from listening beyond the expected, from exploring anomalies that others dismissed. So one evening, while running diagnostics after a long day's survey, Sarah brought it up. "What if," she asked, "we've been misinterpreting these deep movement signatures?" The data analyst, specialist Eric Chen, laughed. "You mean the equipment errors? The ones we get at 200 feet? "No," Sarah said. "I mean the consistent returns we're getting near the grounding line. That pattern isn't random. It's too regular, too structured. What if we modified the array to focus specifically on those frequencies?" Harrington stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "That's the dumbest waste of resources I've heard all month," he said. "We're here to map the shelf, not chase ghosts in the machine." But Sarah wasn't joking. She was already planning how to reconfigure the system. Rejection, determination, and a signal through the noise. At first, no one took Sarah seriously. The idea of recalibrating their million-dollar equipment to chase what most of the team considered interference was laughable to her colleagues. They called it Minnesota madness. They said she was trying to find alien submarines or lost civilizations, like someone who sees faces in static noise. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, the mission commander, made it clear. This isn't the kind of deployment where you get to indulge pet theories. You see anomalous readings, you log them as interference, and you move on with the mission parameters. But Sarah didn't back down. She kept analyzing, kept running independent diagnostics, kept recording the patterns in her personal notebook. Amplitude variations, frequency shifts, movement vectors across the ice shelf's grounding line where it met the seafloor. She studied the capabilities of the ANPS-14 ground-penetrating radar system, especially when modified with the experimental deep ice penetrating array developed for Operation Deep Freeze. This equipment could theoretically map structures up to 3,000 feet below the surface, but interpretation became increasingly difficult past 500 feet, where signal degradation created ambiguity. If she was going to prove her theory, she had to eliminate every possible alternative explanation. So she looked for correlations with tidal movements, for thermal expansion effects, for equipment vibration patterns, for anything that might explain the rhythmic signature she kept detecting at precisely the same depth across disparate sections of the Ross ice shelf. Still, no one approved her request for dedicated equipment time until one afternoon in late February. The Antarctic summer was waning. Temperature drops were becoming more severe. The team was preparing for the coming darkness when continuous operation would become significantly more difficult. That day, a routine survey near McMurdo Sound had produced the same anomalous readings Sarah had been tracking for weeks. This time, however, the signature was stronger, more defined. That night, Sarah made her move. She asked Chen, the data analyst, to help her run an unofficial diagnostic series. They reprogrammed the radar array to focus specifically on the frequency range where the anomaly appeared strongest. Instead of the broad-spectrum sweep protocol, they narrowed the focus to penetrate deeper with higher resolution, sacrificing range for clarity. Nothing happened for hours, just wind, cold, and the occasional drift of snow against the vehicle's armored sides. But then through the static, a pattern. Not just movement, but structure. A massive form, nearly 200 feet in length, moving with deliberate slowness beneath the ice shelf at a depth of approximately 200 feet. Sarah tracked it through 3 successive passes, following its lazy movement across their survey grid. She didn't report it immediately. It wasn't worth triggering alarms without better data, but something had clicked. The signal was there. It was real. They returned to base without incident. Harrington reprimanded her for modifying equipment protocols without authorization, but Sarah didn't argue. She knew what she detected. She knew it required further investigation. The next day, everything changed. A research team from the British Antarctic Survey reported unusual seismic activity near the exact coordinates where Sarah had detected the anomaly. Their equipment had registered what they described as biologically consistent movement patterns at depth. Within hours, 3 other research stations had confirmed unusual readings from the same area. Harrington, half-curious despite himself, turned to Sarah. "You still think that theory of yours holds water?" Sarah nodded. "Then get your gear ready and prove it." They gave her one chance, one dedicated mission. Sarah chose to deploy their most sensitive equipment package, a modified oil exploration radar array combined with acoustic monitoring devices originally designed for submarine detection. She selected a position near the edge of the shelf where her calculations suggested the anomaly would pass within the next 36 hours, based on its previous movement patterns. The team deployed in 2 vehicles, the primary sensor platform and a support unit with additional power generators and communications equipment. They set up on a relatively stable section of ice. Temperatures plunged to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility dropped as winds picked up, scouring the surface with crystalline precipitation, and then they waited. Hours passed with nothing but background noise. Chen began to fidget. Harrington checked his watch repeatedly, but Sarah remained focused, adjusting settings, filtering frequencies, eliminating interference. Then it happened. The primary display lit up with a clear return. Something massive was moving beneath them, not at 200 feet as previously measured, but at 187 feet, rising closer to the surface. Its shape was more defined now, elongated, segmented, with what appeared to be appendage-like protrusions at regular intervals. "There," Sarah said quietly, pointing to the screen. "That's not ice movement. That's not equipment error. That's something alive." The team fell silent, staring at the unmistakable outline now crawling across their display. The object was moving with purpose, following what appeared to be the underwater contour of the ice shelf. "Could it be a pod of orcas?" Chen suggested, his voice uncertain. "Maybe belugas?" Harrington shook his head slowly. "Wrong shape, wrong movement pattern, wrong depth range." He leaned closer to the screen. "Besides, that thing is at least 200 feet long. No marine mammal gets that size. It could be multiple animals moving in formation," another technician suggested. But the signal was too coherent, too singular. As they watched, it changed direction, ascending slightly before leveling off at approximately 150 feet below the surface. The movement was controlled, deliberate. Sarah sent the live feed back to McMurdo Station. Within minutes, their comm system lit up with incoming messages from the base commander, from Washington, from allied research teams requesting data confirmation. "Whatever it is," Harrington said quietly, "it's got everyone's attention now." For the next 14 hours, they tracked the anomaly as it moved in a pattern that became increasingly difficult to attribute to any known natural phenomenon. It circled, stopped, changed depths, and at one point split into 2 separate signatures before rejoining. When they finally returned to base, exhausted and half-frozen, they found McMurdo Station in contained chaos. Scientists from multiple disciplines had assembled. Military personnel were establishing secure communications with the Pentagon. Equipment was being prepped for immediate deployment. The discovery wasn't just unusual, it was paradigm-shifting. Something large, organized, and apparently intelligent was moving beneath the Antarctic ice shelf. Something that had never been documented before. Western science had just encountered its greatest biological mystery, and the young sonar technician from Minnesota was suddenly at the center of it all. From theory to confirmation. Word of the discovery spread through classified channels before any public acknowledgement. Within days, specialists from naval intelligence, marine biology, and glaciology were flying into McMurdo, despite the approaching winter season. International partners requested briefings. The Russians and Chinese suddenly accelerated their own Antarctic research operations. "Did you hear about Reeves?" one scientist whispered to another, over freeze-dried coffee in the mess hall. Tracked some kind of massive biological entity under the ice, 200 feet long and moving with intent. Most didn't believe it initially. Some said it was equipment malfunction. Others said it was a coordinated school of fish or a previously undocumented migration pattern. But as more data came in from continuous monitoring, the evidence became harder to dismiss. Sarah found herself in daily briefings, explaining her methodology, defending her findings against skeptical senior scientists. She walked them through the signal processing algorithms, the cross-verification procedures, the elimination of alternative explanations. The entity maintains consistent internal structure while changing external configuration, she explained. displaying 3D renderings created from combined radar and sonar returns. It modulates depth and speed in response to topography. It demonstrates problem-solving behavior when encountering obstacles. Dr. Eleanor Winthrop, a renowned marine biologist flown in from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, remains skeptical. The Antarctic ecosystem is harsh but well documented. The energy requirements alone for an organism of this size would be enormous. What could it possibly be feeding on? Sarah didn't have all the answers, but she had the data. And the data was becoming increasingly difficult to explain through conventional biological understanding. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, who had once dismissed her theories, now became her strongest advocate. In meetings with military officials, he stood by her findings. Private Reeves identified an anomaly that our standard protocols would have classified as interference. Her persistence and analytical skills have potentially led to the most significant biological discovery of the century. As the evidence mounted, specialized equipment began arriving at McMurdo, deep-penetrating sonar systems designed for submarine detection, autonomous underwater vehicles capable of operating beneath the ice shelf, teams of specialists from disciplines ranging from cryobiology to geological acoustics. Operation Deep Discovery was established with a simple but unprecedented mission to make contact with and identify the entity moving beneath the Ross ice shelf. Sarah's role expanded from detection to tracking. She worked with a hastily assembled team to establish a network of monitoring stations across the likely movement range of the entity. They deployed sensors through boreholes drilled into the ice, creating a three-dimensional tracking grid that could follow the anomaly's movements in real time. The first major breakthrough came 3 weeks after the initial discovery. An autonomous underwater vehicle equipped with high-definition cameras was deployed through a borehole ahead of the entity's projected path. The team gathered around monitors in the command center, watching the murky underwater feed with nervous anticipation. For hours, there was nothing but ice, the magnificent sculpted underside of the shelf, shaped by centuries of currents and freezing patterns. Then movement in the distance, something displacing water, creating turbulence. The camera operator adjusted focus as the object approached. First impression, enormous. Second, unlike anything previously cataloged, the leading edge appeared segmented, with luminescent patches that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Is it one organism or many? Someone whispered. No one answered as the entity continued to approach. It moved with unsettling grace, propelling itself through coordinated undulations that sent it gliding beneath the ice ceiling. As it passed directly beneath the camera, they caught glimpses of what appeared to be specialized appendages. Not quite tentacles, not quite fins, but structures that seemed designed for manipulating ice. Most disturbing of all was the impression of awareness. The entity altered course to investigate the underwater vehicle, circling it with what could only be described as curiosity. At one point, an appendage reached toward the camera before withdrawing. The entire command center fell silent. This wasn't just a new species, this was intelligence, awareness, purpose. After that encounter, the project's security classification jumped, military presence increased dramatically, scientific findings were compartmentalized. The approaching Antarctic winter provided natural isolation, but additional measures were implemented to restrict information flow. For Sarah, the discovery had transcended professional validation. She had glimpsed something that fundamentally altered her understanding of life on Earth. The entity, now designated Ross 1 in official communications, wasn't just living beneath the ice, it appeared to be manipulating it, possibly even cultivating it. Subsequent tracking revealed that Ross 1 followed the contours of subglacial water channels, particularly areas where nutrients accumulated in the boundary layer between ice and water. Spectroscopic analysis of water samples taken in its wake showed unusual organic compounds and altered microbial populations. It's farming, Dr. Winthrop declared during one analysis session, her skepticism replaced by cautious wonder. It's cultivating the microbial ecosystems beneath the ice, possibly for food, possibly for something else entirely. By April, as darkness settled over Antarctica for the long winter, a new theory had emerged. Ross 1 wasn't an aberration, it wasn't a lone entity. Ice-penetrating radar surveys across multiple regions had begun detecting similar signatures, some smaller, some potentially even larger, moving beneath ice shelves around the continent. Antarctica, long considered a largely barren continent, sealed beneath miles of ice, might actually be home to an entire ecosystem of massive, intelligent entities that had evolved in isolation for millions of years. This revelation forced a fundamental reassessment of Antarctic protection protocols. If these entities had indeed been evolving beneath the ice for millennia, human activities, from research stations to potential resource extraction, might represent an unprecedented threat to their environment. The scientific community found itself confronting an ethical dilemma: how to study these entities without disrupting their habitat or revealing their existence to the world prematurely. For Sarah Reeves, who had begun this journey as simply a sonar technician doing her job, the implications were overwhelming. Her discovery was reshaping scientific understanding, military planning, and potentially international policy regarding Earth's most isolated continent. As she sat in her small quarters one night, reviewing the day's tracking data, Lieutenant Colonel Harrington knocked on her door. "Washington called," he said without preamble. "They're establishing a permanent research initiative, deep biome studies, entity interaction protocols, the works. They want you on it. Not as technical support, as a principal investigator." Sarah looked up, surprised. "But I'm not a scientist. I'm just a technician." Harrington smiled slightly. "Not anymore. Not after this. Some people spend their whole careers looking for something new. You just redefined our understanding of life on Earth." As winter deepened and the base settled into relative isolation, Sarah found herself with unexpected time for reflection. The entities continued their mysterious movements beneath the ice. Research teams continued their careful documentation. But the frantic energy of discovery had given way to something more measured: the methodical process of accepting and understanding a new reality. In her private journal, Sarah wrote, "We thought we were alone on this continent. We thought we understood what life could be, where it could exist. But beneath our feet, separated by just 200 feet of ice, something ancient and aware has been moving all along, watching, waiting, perhaps studying us as we now study them." The discovery that had begun with an anomaly on a radar screen had become something far greater, a humbling reminder of how much remained unknown, even in places humans had occupied for decades. And that, perhaps, was the most profound legacy of the day. A small team of American personnel first detected something moving beneath the ice wall in Antarctica. Nothing would be the same again. The hidden explorers. By June 2012, the endless Antarctic night had settled over McMurdo. Outside temperatures plunged to -80 degrees Fahrenheit. Fierce winds scoured the landscape. Most research stations across the continent had reduced to skeleton crews for winter-over operations. But Operations Center 7, the newly designated research facility focused on Ross 1 and its kin, remained fully staffed and continuously active. Sarah's team had expanded to include 30 specialists from various disciplines: marine biologists, evolutionary theorists, acoustic engineers, and military personnel with backgrounds in underwater operations. A separate group of linguists and communications theorists had been assembled to develop potential first contact protocols. The entities, now catalogued as Ross Shelf Biomes, or RSBs, had proven more numerous and more complex than initially believed. 17 distinct individuals had been identified, ranging in size from approximately 50 feet to the original Ross 1, which stretched nearly 230 feet from end to end. Their behavior defied easy classification. They moved with purpose, seemed to communicate through low-frequency vibrations transmitted through the water and ice, and demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that suggested significant intelligence. Most intriguing was their relationship with the ice itself. "They're not just living under it," Dr. Winthrop explained during one briefing. "They're interacting with it, possibly shaping it. We've detected elevated heat signatures around their primary appendages, suggesting they might be able to selectively melt or manipulate ice structures." The RSBs appeared to create and maintain elaborate channel systems within the lower ice layers, possibly to facilitate water flow or to cultivate the microbial communities that seemed to flourish in their presence. Some even appeared to carve out large cavern spaces where multiple entities would gather periodically. These discoveries raised profound questions. Were these the dominant life forms of an entirely separate ecosystem that had evolved in isolation? Did they represent an evolutionary path that diverged from known marine life millions of years ago? Or were they something even more extraordinary, a truly alien biology that had developed in one of Earth's most extreme environments. For Sarah, who had been promoted to project co-director alongside Dr. Winthrop, the questions went beyond scientific curiosity. She had begun to feel a sense of responsibility toward these creatures. Her discovery had exposed them to human awareness after what might have been millions of years of unobserved existence. "We need to be thinking about protection protocols," she argued during a high-level briefing with military and scientific leadership. "If knowledge of these entities becomes public, we'll have research vessels and commercial interests converging on Antarctica from every nation. Their habitat could be compromised before we even understand what they are." Admiral Lawrence, the Pentagon's representative to the program, nodded thoughtfully. "The Defense Department shares your concerns, Miss Reeves. These organisms potentially represent a unique biological resource. There are already discussions about classifying all related findings under national security protocols." But Sarah wasn't convinced that military classification was the right approach either. These aren't weapons or tactical assets. They're living beings with apparent intelligence. We need conservation measures, not classification. The debate represented a fundamental tension that would define the project moving forward. Scientific discovery versus security. Conservation versus potential application. Disclosure versus secrecy. In July, a breakthrough occurred that shifted the conversation dramatically. The team had deployed a new acoustic monitoring system designed to capture the low-frequency vibrations the RSBs used to communicate. After weeks of recording, Dr. Chen, who had transitioned from data analyst to communications specialist, noticed something remarkable. "They're not just communicating randomly," he announced during an emergency briefing. "There's structure to it. Repeating patterns, variations that respond to specific stimuli. This isn't just signaling, it's language." The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. If the RSBs possessed language, it would place them in an entirely different category of intelligence, alongside cetaceans, primates, and potentially at a level approaching human cognitive capabilities. Further analysis revealed even more astonishing possibilities. The vibrational patterns changed when RSBs encountered human equipment. They demonstrated variations when near different research installations. Most remarkably, they exhibited unique patterns when interacting with ice structures of human origin, boreholes, sampling stations, and equipment installations. "They recognize us as different," Sarah concluded. "They know we're here, and they're discussing us." This realization prompted a fundamental shift in the project's approach. The question was no longer just what the RSBs were, but whether communication might be possible. A specialized team began developing a system to generate controlled vibrations through the ice, hoping to establish basic signaling patterns the entities might recognize. In August, they made their first attempt. Using a network of synchronized vibration generators installed across a half-mile section of ice, they produced a simple repeating pattern: 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, directed toward an area where 3 RSBs had gathered in one of their ice caverns. For 2 days, there was no response. The entities continued their normal patterns of movement and interaction. Then, on the 3rd morning, as Sarah was reviewing overnight data, she noticed something extraordinary. The monitoring station was detecting a return signal: 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, followed by a new pattern. "They answered," she whispered, hands shaking as she called the team together. "And they added something new." The next week saw feverish activity as the communication team attempted to establish basic protocols with the entities. Progress was painstakingly slow. The RSBs communicated through vibrational frequencies humans couldn't naturally perceive. Their cognitive frameworks were entirely unknown. The idea of conversation across such biological and evolutionary divides was unprecedented. Yet gradually, patterns emerged. The RSBs appeared to recognize numerical sequences. They could mirror geometric patterns translated into vibrational sequences. They demonstrated what seemed to be curiosity about the signals, often gathering near transmission points when the system was active. By September, as the first faint glow of approaching spring appeared on the horizon, the project had established what Dr. Chen cautiously termed the foundations of a shared communicative framework. The implications extended far beyond scientific achievement. If humans could communicate with the RSBs, they would be obligated to consider their interests in any future Antarctic development. The continent's governance, long managed through the Antarctic Treaty System, might need fundamental reconsideration. For Sarah, the journey from detection to communication felt both inevitable and miraculous. She had begun by noticing an anomaly others dismissed. Now she was part of humanity's first attempt to converse with an entirely new form of intelligence. One evening, as she sat reviewing the day's communication attempts, Lieutenant Colonel Harrington joined her in the quiet monitoring room. "Did you ever imagine it would go this far?" he asked, gesturing toward the screens showing the real-time positions of several RSBs beneath the ice. Sarah shook her head. "I just wanted to understand what I was seeing. I never thought that you'd end up trying to talk to whatever it was." Harrington finished with a slight smile. "Something like that." Harrington was silent for a moment, watching the gentle movements of the entities below. "You know Washington's split on how to proceed. Half want to announce this as the scientific discovery of the century. The other half want to bury it so deep no one ever finds out." "And what do you think?" Sarah asked. "I think," he said carefully, "that it's not entirely our decision to make anymore." He pointed to the largest blip on the screen, Ross 1, the first entity she had detected. "They're aware of us now. The question isn't just what we do with this discovery, it's what they decide to do about being discovered." As if to punctuate his point, the proximity alarm sounded. Ross 1 was ascending, moving closer to the ice surface than ever previously recorded, directly beneath their research station, the secret dialogue and the world beyond. By October 2012, as Antarctica emerged from its long winter darkness, the nature of Project Deep Discovery had transformed entirely. What began as observation had evolved into interaction. What started as a scientific curiosity had become a diplomatic challenge, unlike any in human history. The RSBs, particularly Ross 1 and 3 other large entities the team had designated as elders based on their apparent leadership role, had begun initiating communication sequences. Their vibrational patterns had grown more complex, more nuanced, and increasingly directed at specific human activities. When a supply plane landed at McMurdo's ice runway, the entities gathered beneath the ice nearby, sending patterns that the linguistics team interpreted as queries. When researchers deployed new equipment through boreholes, the RSBs would investigate immediately, transmitting complex sequences that seemed to request information. Most significantly, they had begun what appeared to be territorial marking. Using their heat-generating appendages, they melted distinctive patterns into the underside of the ice shelf, geometric designs that corresponded to areas of frequent RSB activity. "They're drawing us a map," Dr. Winthrop suggested during an analysis session, "showing us where they live, where they farm their microbial gardens, where they gather." It's not just communication, it's boundary setting. For Sarah, who now split her time between technical operations and serving as the project's liaison to Washington, these developments raised increasingly complex questions. The RSBs weren't just biological curiosities, they were potentially a sovereign community with their own interests and territories. "We need to start thinking about this in diplomatic terms," she argued during a secure video conference with Pentagon and State Department officials. "These entities have been here far longer than human presence in Antarctica. They have established territories, communication systems, possibly social structures. We're the newcomers here." The officials on the other end of the connection looked uncomfortable. Antarctic politics were already complicated. 7 nations maintained territorial claims held in abeyance by the Antarctic Treaty, while the scientific community advocated for preservation and research access. Adding a non-human intelligence with potential territorial rights would upend decades of careful diplomatic balance. "We understand your concern, Ms. Reeves," the State Department representative responded carefully, "but we're still dealing with fundamental questions about classification. Are these organisms wildlife requiring conservation? Are they a potential resource? Or are you suggesting we treat them as a foreign nation?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the unprecedented nature of the situation. Human diplomatic frameworks had never contemplated non-human intelligence as a negotiating party. Meanwhile, international complications were growing. Despite intense secrecy, hints of the discovery had leaked through scientific channels. Russian and Chinese research stations had increased activity in the region. Satellite imagery showed new installations being constructed on the ice, near areas of known RSB activity. Intelligence reports suggested both nations had detected unusual signals and were conducting their own investigations. The situation reached a critical point in November when a Chinese research vessel deployed an autonomous underwater vehicle in an area frequented by several RSBs. Within hours, the vehicle stopped transmitting. Satellite imagery later showed increased Chinese activity, suggesting they had made their own direct observations. An emergency meeting was convened at McMurdo, bringing together the core research team with military and intelligence representatives. "We've lost control of the information," Admiral Lawrence stated bluntly. "The Chinese have definitely observed at least one entity. The Russians have established 3 new monitoring stations along the shelf edge. We need to decide on an official position before someone else defines the narrative." Sarah looked around the table at the assembled experts, scientists who had dedicated their careers to understanding Earth's most extreme environments, military personnel trained to evaluate threats and opportunities, intelligence analysts skilled at predicting geopolitical movements. None of them had been prepared for this scenario. "I think we need to consider what the RSBs would want," she said finally. Everyone turned to look at her. "We've established rudimentary communication. We've observed their territorial markings. Before we decide how to present this to the world, shouldn't we try to understand their position?" There was skeptical murmuring around the table, but Dr. Winthrop nodded slowly. "Sarah's right. We've been so focused on studying them that we haven't considered their agency in this situation. They're clearly intelligent enough to understand that their world has changed. They must have their own perspective on human presence." After intense debate, a new approach was approved. The team would attempt to communicate the concept of other humans to the RSBs and gauge their reaction. Using their developing vibrational language, supplemented with underwater imagery, they would try to explain that many different human groups existed and were interested in Antarctic environments. What followed was perhaps the most unusual diplomatic exchange in history. Over 2 weeks, using increasingly sophisticated vibrational sequences, underwater cameras, and light displays through the ice, the team attempted to convey complex concepts of human diversity, research interests, and potential cooperation to beings that had evolved in complete isolation from human civilization. The RSB's responses were difficult to interpret with certainty, but several patterns emerged clearly. They reacted strongly to images of ice breaking or drilling operations. They created elaborate vibrational sequences when shown underwater construction. Most tellingly, they began creating new territorial markings that encompassed larger areas of the ice shelf, including sections where human research stations were located. "They're not just saying this is our territory," Chen explained during the analysis session. Based on the pattern variations, they appeared to be designating different zones, areas they consider exclusively theirs, areas where they seem open to shared access, and buffer regions in between. It's sophisticated spatial planning. This information presented both a challenge and an opportunity. The RSBs were clearly asserting territorial claims, but they also appeared to recognize the concept of shared spaces. They weren't rejecting human presence entirely, but they were establishing boundaries. Armed with this understanding, Sarah and the project leadership prepared a formal recommendation to Washington. The United States should take the lead in recognizing the RSBs as intelligent native inhabitants of Antarctica, with legitimate territorial interests. This recognition should be incorporated into a new international framework for Antarctica governance, with special protections for RSB habitats and communication protocols for activities that might affect their environment. The proposal was radical. It would transform Antarctica from a continent governed exclusively by human diplomatic agreements to one where non-human intelligence held recognized rights and interests. It would create a precedent with implications for potential intelligent species discoveries elsewhere on Earth, in deep ocean environments, for instance, or even beyond. The response from Washington was predictably cautious. National security concerns, scientific uncertainty, and diplomatic complexities all argued for a more measured approach, but events soon forced the issue into the open. In early December, a Russian research station released limited scientific findings describing large biological entities with apparent intelligence beneath the Ross ice shelf. The Chinese followed within days, publishing their own observations. Social media exploded with speculation. News organizations scrambled to verify the claims. The scientific community demanded access to data. Within 72 hours, what had been a highly classified discovery became the focus of global attention. Satellite imagery of research stations was analyzed on news programs. Former project members were offered enormous sums for insider information. Religious leaders issued statements about the theological implications of non-human intelligence. For Sarah Reeves, watching this unfold from the relative isolation of McMurdo Station, the situation brought both vindication and concern. Her discovery had finally been acknowledged worldwide, but the entities she had come to respect were now subjects of intense, uninformed speculation. In a private moment, she confided to Dr. Winthrop, "I feel responsible for exposing them to this. They've been here for who knows how long, thousands of years, maybe millions, living their lives without human interference. Now they're headline news." Dr. Winthrop considered this thoughtfully. Or perhaps this is exactly what needed to happen. They were going to be discovered eventually, better by someone who recognized their intelligence and advocated for their protection than by commercial interests looking for exploitation opportunities. As international pressure mounted for a coordinated response, the United States finally announced the formation of the Antarctic Intelligent Life Cooperative Research Initiative, a multinational, scientific body with the dual mission of advancing understanding of the RSBs while developing protocols for respectful interaction and habitat preservation. Sarah was named as the initiative's technical director, responsible for overseeing communication efforts and ensuring research activities respected the territorial markers established by the RSBs. It was an unprecedented role, part scientist, part diplomat, part advocate for a non-human community. In January 2013, as Antarctic summer brought 24-hour daylight and increased accessibility, the first official multinational research expedition gathered at McMurdo. Scientists from 12 nations, selected for both expertise and diplomatic representation, prepared for coordinated observation and communication attempts with the RSBs. The night before the expedition was to begin, Sarah stood alone at the edge of the ice shelf, looking out over the endless white expanse. Beneath her feet, separated by hundreds of feet of ancient ice, the entities continued their mysterious movements. She wondered what they made of the increased activity above, the aircraft, the new structures, the heightened vibrations of human presence. A voice behind her broke her reverie. "Thinking about your friends down there." It was Harrington, now promoted to full colonel and serving as military liaison to the international initiative. Sarah smiled slightly. "Wondering if they think of us as friends is more like it." He nodded, understanding the weight of her concerns. "You know, when this all started, I thought you were chasing equipment ghosts. Now I'm standing here wondering if we're about to establish diplomatic relations with an ice-dwelling civilization few people knew existed a year ago." "Life comes at you fast," Sarah said with a small laugh. "Indeed it does." Harrington looked out across the ice. "Whatever happens next, you've changed everything. Not just science or military planning. You've changed how humanity thinks about intelligence, about life, about our place on this planet." Sarah considered this. From her first detection of an unusual movement beneath the ice to this moment on the cusp of formal multinational contact, the journey had been extraordinary. But it was only beginning. The true nature of the RSBs, their evolutionary history, their full capabilities, these remained mysteries to be explored through years of careful study and communication. More complex still were the ethical and diplomatic challenges ahead. How would human civilization incorporate the interests of non-human intelligence into governance structures? What precedents would be set for future discoveries? What rights should be recognized? What protections established? As the midnight sun cast long shadows across the ice, Sarah realized that her discovery had opened not just a new chapter in scientific understanding, but in human ethical evolution. The beings moving beneath the Antarctic ice had existed in isolation for eons. Now they would help reshape humanity's understanding of intelligence, consciousness, and responsibility toward other thinking beings. "Tomorrow's going to be historic," Harrington said, breaking the silence. Sarah nodded. "It already is." The breach in understanding, by mid-2013, what had begun as a scientific anomaly detected by a single technician had evolved into a multinational research priority with unprecedented security, diplomatic, and ethical dimensions. The Ross Ice Shelf had become the site of the most sophisticated research installation ever established in Antarctica. 6 nations had contributed personnel and equipment to the Antarctic Communication and Research Initiative, AACRI. Specially designed acoustic transmission systems had been installed across a 50-mile grid to facilitate ongoing communication with the RSBs. The entities themselves had proven both more numerous and more diverse than initially understood. The research team had identified over 70 distinct individuals ranging from the massive 230-foot Ross 1 to smaller, apparently juvenile specimens approximately 30 feet in length. Their social organization appeared to center around the activities of the larger individuals, with smaller entities often performing what seemed to be specialized roles in their underwater ecosystem management. Most significant was the progress in communication. Dr. Chen and the linguistics team had developed an expanding lexicon of vibrational patterns that allowed for basic information exchange. The RSBs demonstrated remarkable adaptability, adjusting their communication to accommodate human limitations and showing increasing sophistication in their responses. "They're learning our patterns faster than we're learning theirs," Dr. Chen observed during one assessment session. "It suggests not just intelligence, but specialized cognitive adaptation for language acquisition. They may have evolved to communicate with multiple subspecies or colonies with different dialects." The content of these communications remained relatively basic, primarily focused on territorial boundaries, movement coordination, and identifying specific entities or locations. But occasional exchanges hinted at deeper conceptual understanding. In one notable instance, after researchers used vibrations to describe the concept of the sun and its relationship to seasonal ice formation, the RSBs responded with patterns that appeared to reference much older ice conditions, possibly indicating awareness of climate cycles spanning centuries or even millennia. "They may have generational memory," Dr. Winthrop suggested, "knowledge passed down that extends beyond individual lifespan. It would explain their apparent understanding of long-term ice shelf dynamics." For Sarah, who now divided her time between direct research and managing the growing bureaucratic demands of the project, each new discovery reinforced both the importance and the responsibility of their work. "We're not just studying them," she reminded the team during a briefing for newcomers. "We're establishing the foundation for an ongoing relationship between two intelligent populations sharing the same environment. Everything we do sets precedents that will last generations." This perspective wasn't universally embraced. As the project expanded, competing interests emerged. Military representatives emphasized security implications and potential strategic applications. Commercial observers, allowed limited access under scientific oversight, evaluated prospects for bioprospecting and resource access. Political appointees worried about treaty implications and national positioning. Tension came to a head in September when a proposal was advanced to extract tissue samples from RSBs for genetic analysis. Proponents argued it was essential for understanding the entity's biological nature and evolutionary history. Opponents, including Sarah, countered that such invasive sampling violated the trust being established through communication efforts. "We wouldn't perform biopsies on diplomatic counterparts," she argued during a heated planning session. "If we're serious about treating these beings as intelligent entities with rights, we can't simultaneously treat them as specimens to be sampled without consent." The debate escalated to Washington, where it became entangled with broader questions about the legal and ethical status of the RSBs. Were they a protected species? Were they sovereign entities? Did existing frameworks like the Antarctic Treaty System even have language to address non-human intelligence? While these questions remained unresolved at the policy level, a more immediate crisis emerged on the ice. In early October, acoustic monitoring detected unusual movement patterns among the RSBs. Large numbers were gathering in deep water near the grounding line, where the ice shelf met the ocean floor. Their communication patterns had changed, showing increased repetition and amplitude that the linguistics team interpreted as potential distress or alarm signals. Simultaneously, seismic monitors registered unusual activity deep beneath the ice shelf. Ground-penetrating radar showed structural changes in subglacial water channels that had previously remained stable for years. "Something's disrupting their environment," Sarah concluded after reviewing the data, "and they're reacting to it." Further investigation revealed the likely cause. A Russian research installation 60 miles from the main ACRI facility had begun deep ice drilling operations, apparently seeking access to a subglacial lake system that intersected with channels frequently used by the RSBs. Acoustic data suggested the drilling was creating harmful resonance patterns in the RSB's habitat. More concerning, if the drill penetrated certain ice structures, it could potentially damage or contaminate areas that appeared to be critical to the entity's activities. Sara immediately requested an emergency consultation with the Russians through diplomatic channels. The response was politely dismissive. The drilling was fully compliant with Antarctic treaty provisions, they insisted, and there was no conclusive evidence of harm to the biological subjects. They're exploiting the legal gap, Admiral Lawrence explained during a crisis meeting. The treaty doesn't specifically protect subglacial environments from research access, and it certainly doesn't acknowledge territorial claims by non-human entities. Sara faced a defining moment. The official channels were moving too slowly. The drilling was continuing. The RSBs were showing increasing signs of distress. She made her decision. "I'm going to explain the situation directly to the entities," she announced. "They have the right to know what's happening in their environment." The team was divided on this approach. Some worried that communicating about human conflicts would confuse or alarm the RSBs. Others feared it might provoke unpredictable responses. But Sara was resolute. Using the most advanced communication array and the full lexicon of established patterns, she attempted to convey a complex message. Different human groups existed. Some were not coordinating with others. Activities were occurring that might affect RSB territories. The main research team was attempting to address the situation. The response came within hours and was stronger than anticipated. The RSBs transmitted patterns of unprecedented complexity and duration. When analyzed, they contained both familiar elements related to territory and movement, and entirely new sequences that the team struggled to interpret. More dramatically, the entities began concentrated activity beneath the ice in the vicinity of the Russian drilling operation. Seismic sensors detected vibrations that appeared deliberately generated, not communication signals, but focused energy directed at specific ice structures. Within 24 hours, the Russian research station reported unexpected ice instability in their drilling area. Operations were temporarily suspended due to technical issues. Satellite imagery showed new cracks forming in the ice surface around their installation. "They're physically responding," Dr. Winthrop said, reviewing the data with a mixture of awe and concern. "They're using their heat-generating capabilities to structurally alter the ice around the drilling site." The message was unmistakable. The RSBs had comprehended the threat to their environment and had taken direct action to protect it. It wasn't aggressive, no personnel were harmed, no equipment directly damaged, but it was decisive. A boundary had been established, not through diplomatic channels, but through directed environmental modification. The international fallout was immediate. The Russians filed formal protests alleging American interference with their research activities. Chinese representatives called for independent verification of all RSB-related claims. Smaller nations with Antarctic research interests demanded greater transparency and participation. In Washington, the National Security Council convened an emergency session. The State Department established a special working group on non-human territorial recognition. The scientific community exploded with debate about research ethics and first contact protocols. For Sara Reeves, whose decision to directly inform the RSBs had catalyzed this crisis, the personal and professional stakes were enormous. She was simultaneously celebrated by conservation advocates and condemned by those who saw her actions as overstepping authority. Some questioned whether she had developed too much sympathy for the entities at the expense of human interests. In a tense video conference with Pentagon leadership, she defended her position. What happened at the Russian drilling site wasn't an attack. It was a demonstration of territorial sovereignty. These entities have been managing the under-ice environment for possibly millions of years. They have the capacity, and I would argue, the right to protect their habitat from disruption. The debate continued at multiple levels: scientific, military, diplomatic, but the fundamental reality had shifted. The RSBs had moved from objects of study to active participants in determining Antarctic activities. They had demonstrated not just intelligence, but agency, the capacity to understand complex situations and take deliberate action to influence outcomes. This development forced a fundamental reassessment. The existing framework of Antarctic governance, built on the premise of a continent without indigenous inhabitants, was suddenly inadequate. New approaches would be needed, new concepts of shared sovereignty, new mechanisms for cross-species consultation. In December 2013, 1 year after the discovery had become public, representatives from 12 nations gathered in Wellington, New Zealand, for what was cautiously termed the Conference on Antarctic Biological Intelligence and Governance Implications. The agenda was unprecedented, acknowledging non-human intelligence as a stakeholder in international treaty negotiations. Sarah attended as part of the American delegation, providing technical expertise on communication capabilities and RSB behavioral patterns. The discussions were difficult, the concepts novel, the implications far-reaching. Traditional notions of sovereignty, territorial rights, and governance were being stretched to accommodate beings that experience the world in fundamentally different ways. "We're not just creating policy," she noted during one working group session. "We're establishing a philosophical framework for how humanity will relate to other intelligent life on Earth. The precedents we set here will matter not just for Antarctica, but for how we approach potential discoveries in deep oceans or even beyond our planet." After 2 weeks of intense negotiation, the Wellington Protocols emerged, an addendum to the Antarctic Treaty System that formally recognized biologically intelligent indigenous Antarctic entities and established protected zones, communication requirements for research activities, and consultation mechanisms for operations that might affect under-ice environments. It wasn't a perfect solution. Many questions remained unresolved. Enforcement would be challenging. Different nations interpreted key provisions in ways that aligned with their strategic interests. But it was a beginning, the first legal framework in human history that acknowledged non-human intelligence as having legitimate rights and interests. For Sarah Reeves, who had begun this journey by noticing an anomaly on a radar screen, the Wellington Protocols represented a profound validation. The entities she had discovered were no longer just subjects of research, they were recognized participants in determining the future of their ancient home. As she prepared to return to Antarctica for the continued communication efforts, she reflected on how completely her life had transformed in less than 2 years. The once overlooked sonar technician was now at the center of humanity's first substantive relationship with non-human intelligence. More importantly, the understanding of Antarctica itself had been irreversibly changed. What had once been viewed as a barren, lifeless continent valuable primarily for scientific research and potential resources was now recognized as the homeland of an ancient, intelligent community with its own interests and rights. The ice wall that had seemed a barrier had become a boundary between worlds, not impermeable but requiring respect and understanding to cross. And beneath it moved beings who had been there all along, watching, waiting, and now, at last, being acknowledged, shared horizons and uncertain futures. By 2015, the Antarctic Communication Research Initiative had evolved into a permanent installation with year-round operations. The Wellington Protocols had been ratified by 16 nations, establishing the framework for human RSB interactions across the continent. Communication capabilities had advanced significantly. Using sophisticated vibrational arrays combined with light-based signals transmitted through boreholes, researchers could now exchange complex concepts with the entities. The developing shared language included over 400 confirmed signal patterns with generally agreed meanings, allowing for discussions of territory, movement, environmental conditions, and basic intentions. More profound was the growing body of knowledge about RSB society and biology. They appeared to be a highly specialized evolutionary branch that had adapted to life beneath Antarctic ice over millions of years. Their biology combined elements recognizable from cephalopods, multiple specialized appendages, distributed neural systems, with unique adaptations for ice manipulation and extreme cold conditions. They maintained complex social structures organized around what researchers termed cultivation zones, areas where they actively managed microbial ecosystems that grew on the ice-water boundary. Different entities specialized in different aspects of this cultivation, suggesting a sophisticated division of labor. Most remarkably, they demonstrated historical knowledge that appeared to span thousands of years. Through carefully structured communication sessions, researchers had determined that the entities maintained awareness of ice conditions dating back to the last major glacial period. This suggested either exceptional longevity or, more likely, sophisticated methods of preserving and transmitting knowledge across generations. For Sarah, now serving as the scientific director of human RSB relations, These revelations carried profound implications. "We're not just dealing with another intelligent species," she explained during a briefing for United Nations representatives. "We're interacting with a civilization that has potentially existed in stable form since before human writing was developed. Their understanding of Antarctic environments likely exceeds our entire historical scientific record." This perspective increasingly shaped international approaches to Antarctic research and resource considerations. Proposals for mineral exploration, previously delayed by treaty provisions, were now evaluated against potential impacts on RSB habitats and activities. Scientific research required communication, and often consent from local RSB populations, facilitated through the growing network of translation specialists. The entities themselves had become more proactive in these interactions. They initiated communication about ice conditions, flagged areas of environmental concern, and adapted their movements to accommodate human research activities when adequately explained and negotiated. In 2016, a milestone event occurred that symbolized the evolving relationship. A major ice shelf calving event was predicted based on satellite data and ice movement tracking. Such events were natural, but could potentially disrupt both human research stations and RSB cultivation areas. Through coordinated communication, human researchers and RSBs established a joint monitoring system and shared evacuation protocols. When the calving occurred, a massive section of ice larger than Rhode Island breaking away from the shelf, both human and RSB communities had relocated vulnerable operations. The event was hailed as the first successful cross-species cooperative disaster mitigation in human history. Yet challenges remained. Some technical, others more fundamental. The communication system, while advanced, still struggled with abstract concepts. Human attempts to explain history, global climate systems, or the broader human world met with uncertain comprehension. Similarly, RSB communications about their deeper social structures and knowledge systems often exceeded the translation capabilities of human researchers. More complex were the emerging philosophical and ethical questions. As understanding of RSB intelligence deepened, debates intensified about their legal status, their representation in international forums, and the extent of human obligations toward them. Are they a sovereign nation, an endangered intelligent species, co-inhabitants of a shared continent? All of these frameworks have different implications, Sara noted in a journal article that attracted significant academic and diplomatic attention. Our existing concepts of rights, sovereignty, and diplomatic relations were all developed in an exclusively human context. They may be fundamentally inadequate for this new reality. These questions took on greater urgency as climate change accelerated ice shelf deterioration across Antarctica. Regions that had been stable for thousands of years were showing signs of structural weakness. Ocean warming was altering the conditions of the microbial ecosystems the RSBs cultivated. The environments they had evolved to inhabit were changing at unprecedented rates. Initial communication about these changes revealed that the RSBs were aware of the shifting conditions, but didn't fully comprehend the human connection to global climate patterns. Explaining humanity's role in environmental change presented both technical communication challenges and ethical dilemmas. How do we tell them that our activities, thousands of miles away, are threatening their habitat? Dr. Winthrop asked during one strategy session. And what responsibility do we take for mitigating those threats once they understand? In 2017, a specialized climate communication project was established to address these questions. Using carefully developed visual and vibrational representations, researchers began explaining basic concepts of global warming, carbon emissions, and ice shelf dynamics to RSB representatives. The response was profound. The entities transmitted lengthy, complex patterns that linguists interpreted as expressions of deep concern. They began extensive surveys of ice conditions across their territories, sharing findings that often detected structural weaknesses before human monitoring systems could identify them. Most significantly, they initiated what appeared to be their own climate adaptation measures, relocating cultivation zones to more stable areas, developing new techniques for reinforcing ice structures, and establishing what researchers termed knowledge repositories in the most secure locations. These activities made clear that the RSBs understood the threat to their environment at a fundamental level. They were preparing for a changing world, drawing on adaptation strategies that had potentially helped them survive previous climate transitions over their long evolutionary history. For Sara, Witnessing these responses brought both admiration and a sense of responsibility. The beings her discovery had revealed were demonstrating remarkable resilience in the face of challenges largely created by human activity. Their capacity to adapt, to plan, to reorganize in response to threat reflected an intelligence that deserved not just study but partnership. In late 2017, she proposed an ambitious extension of the Communication Project, an attempt to explore the possibility of RSB representatives participating in international climate discussions through human proxies. The concept was revolutionary, non-human intelligence contributing to global environmental policy through facilitated communication. They have knowledge of ice systems that predates our scientific understanding by millennia, she argued. Their perspective on Antarctic climate history and adaptation strategies could provide insights we haven't considered. More fundamentally, as beings directly affected by our decisions, they have a right to representation in discussions that determine their future. The proposal generated intense debate across scientific, diplomatic, and ethical communities. Some embraced the concept as a natural evolution of expanded rights recognition. Others raised practical concerns about communication limitations and representation mechanisms. Still others objected to the premise that non-human entities should have input into human policy decisions. After months of discussion at multiple levels, a compromise approach was approved. A specialized communication team would work with RSB representatives to document their understanding of Antarctic climate history and current conditions. This knowledge would be formally presented at international climate conferences with acknowledgement of its non-human origin. While not direct participation, it represented a significant step toward recognizing RSB perspectives in global environmental governance. For Sarah Reeves, who had begun this journey as a sonar technician, noticing an anomaly on her screen, this development represented the culmination of a remarkable evolution, from discovery to communication to collaboration to representation. The beings moving beneath the Antarctic ice had progressed from scientific curiosity to acknowledged partners in understanding and managing their shared environment. The barriers between human and non-human intelligence hadn't dissolved entirely, but they had become permeable, allowing for exchange and mutual influence. As she prepared for another Antarctic winter at the research facility that had become her home, Sarah reflected on the broader significance of the relationship that had developed since that first detection. "We've always searched for intelligent life in the stars," she wrote in her personal journal, looking outward for connection with something beyond ourselves. All the while, another intelligence was moving beneath our feet, separated by just a few hundred feet of ice, waiting to be discovered, not through space telescopes, but through someone simply paying attention to an unexpected signal. The discovery beneath the ice hadn't just revealed a new form of life. It had challenged humanity to expand its conception of intelligence, of rights, of responsibility toward other thinking beings. It had created a precedent for how humans might approach future encounters with non-human intelligence, whether on Earth or beyond. And it had begun with a single anomalous reading on a radar screen, a reminder that the most profound discoveries often come not from looking up to the stars, but from paying closer attention to the world immediately around us, where unexpected wonders may be moving just beneath the surface, waiting to be recognized.